Okay, the live stream has started.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jackie Guzman. I serve as the city's deputy city manager, and I'm also the city's diversity and inclusion liaison. Tonight's event is brought to you by the city of Sunnyvale as part of our Sunnyvale Unity initiative. Sunnyvale Unity represents the city's commitment to creating a culture of belonging where all members of our diverse community feel included, heard, and respected. This unity gathering is a time for us to acknowledge the pain and fear facing the Asian American and Pacific Islander, or AAPI, community. We're here to elevate your voices, understand your concerns, and work together to address hate and bigotry. First, Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein would like to say a few words of welcome. Mayor?
Welcome. My name is Larry Klein. I serve as the mayor of City of Sunnyvale. Tonight, we are here to listen to our Asian American and Pacific Islander community and stand in solidarity against anti-Asian hate. There's been an alarming increase in anti-Asian hate incidents across the country since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. The recent high-profile hate crimes here in the Bay Area and a mass shooting in Atlanta have heightened fears in our AAPI community. Sunnyvale takes pride in the incredible diversity of the people who form the rich fabric of our city, and we condemn these racist attacks. Sadly, the issue of bigotry and hatred is not new. In 2019, we all came together to acknowledge that hate and fear exist in our community and to heal after a horrific hate crime here in Sunnyvale. Last year, we held a series of listening sessions to discuss systemic racism disproportionately impacting the Black community. Now, it's time for us to stand in solidarity with our Asian American community members. We must pull together again to acknowledge and discuss ways to address hate and bigotry. I want to express my sincere gratitude to those of you who have chosen to participate in this important conversation. Your support and your engagement are vital. Together, we can make our city a safe, welcoming, and vibrant place for everyone. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge my council colleagues in attendance tonight. Vice Mayor Glenn Hendricks, Councilmember Gustav Larson, Councilmember Russ Melton, Councilmember Mason Fong, Councilmember Alyssa Cisneros, and Councilmember Omar Dean. They, as well as our city manager, Kent Steffens, are here to listen to you tonight. Also joining us is State Senator Josh Becker and State Assembly Member Mark Berman, who would like to share a few words with you.
Great. Well, I just want to start out to say that I'm really honored to be here. I'm proud to be here. I'm proud of this community, and I'm proud to stand in solidarity with our AAPI community. You are our friends. You are our neighbors. You are our professionals. You are our shopkeepers. You are our just our fellow citizens that we go about the day. And as a member of the Jewish community, which has known what it's like to be victims of hatred, I know that it's so important that we all stand together and that our community is stronger when we all stand up for each other. And that's why I'm really proud to be here, standing in solidarity with the community in this fantastic gathering today. Just two notes. Tomorrow, I'll be convening, along with Assemblyman Berman, a meeting of police chiefs from the region, and including our public safety chief here, Fan No. And we will be listening in a listening session with members of our AAPI community. So proud to be doing that. And proud to be working with my colleagues with this assortment of legislation that's already been introduced, as well as I just ran into David Chu, and he's meeting with my Senate colleague, Richard Pan, and they're working on a much more comprehensive piece of legislation now to stop AAPI hate. So once again, proud to be here today. Really grateful to the council, and to you, Mayor Klein, and looking forward to the gathering today.
Thank you. Assemblymember Berman.
Yeah, thank you so much just for the opportunity to briefly speak. Thank you to Mayor Klein, and always good to see my colleague Senator Becker, and reiterate the points that he made and the support for our AAPI community. Today and going into tomorrow is Yom HaShoah in the Jewish community, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And we remember the victims of the Holocaust, the 6 million Jews, the 11 million non-Jews, but we also remember those who stood up for us, who risked their lives to save Jewish lives in Europe during the Holocaust. And we say never again, but we also remember the obligation that we have to stand up for our friends, for our neighbors, for our colleagues, for our families, for our communities. And we, all of us, have an obligation to stand up for the AAPI communities that we represent, who again, we live alongside. It was a little less than 2 years ago that there was a shooting in Poway at a synagogue in Southern California. And I was in my third year in the legislature at that time. And I'll never forget the support that we received from the other communities, both in the Sacramento community and the legislature, including and especially with the API caucus, and then back home in the district, and how everybody saw Jews being targeted and stood up and said, we're not going to stand for this. Well, right now our AAPI community is being targeted, and we're not going to stand for this. And we're going to stand up. We're going to stand beside you. We'll stand in front of you. We'll stand with you. And Senator Becker alluded to some of the legislative and budgetary programs that we're going to be trying to get resources for, in particular for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which will be available for API organizations to increase the security of their facilities and of their members. So, we're here, we're with you. And keep on coming to us and telling us what you need from us, because we're here to serve you, and when necessary, we'll be there to protect you, and we stand with you.
Thank you. And with that, I'd like to get started by inviting Pastor Hardy Kim of the Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church to do a convocation. Pastor.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, City Council members and everybody else present. I invite you all now to join your hearts with mine in a moment of reflection or in prayer as you feel spiritually led. Divine Spirit, you are known to us by many names and stories as varied as the beautiful cultures and backgrounds that make up the rich diversity of our AAPI communities. And in every way that you have made your presence known to us, you have taught us that respect for the other, care for the stranger and the oppressed, love of people and your creation over the love of power and wealth, that these are what make up the path to joy and enlightenment. Holy Creator of all humanity, we also trust that you know us, that you care for and are involved in all of our dreams and struggles. We ask that you would strengthen our Asian and Pacific Islander communities in this moment in Sunnyvale and all across our country. May the work that we are doing here offer hope and a sense of true belonging to AAPI folks, whether immigrant or native born, and let everybody know that we stand up for the full humanity of all. And may your wisdom convict our neighbors of all races and backgrounds of the truth that AAPI folks are also fully human, deserving of dignity and voice in our society, so that together we might all work to build a Sunnyvale and a broader world where our young people are not ridiculed or bullied at school, where our elders can walk the streets and shop at markets without fear, and where no one targets us for abuse or violence because they believe us to be vulnerable or expendable or nameless, where no one can tell us that we don't belong. By your justice, peace, and power, may we all move forward with this vision and with love for all. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for those thoughtful words, Pastor. So we're gonna begin by understanding, getting a flavor for who is in the room and how everyone is feeling with a short poll. So if I can ask you to please open your browser, and you can do this on your phone or on your computer, and go to www.menti.com. There's also a QR code you could use if you're using your phone. And it'll ask you to enter a code. And that code is shown there, 26461538. And we'll just give you a moment to do that. Again, menti.com, and enter the code 26461538. Okay. And David, does it look like we have, oh, is it this the number here? We have about 18 people, so it looks like we have to give folks a little bit more time. Because I see there's at least 70 or so participants and 20 or so panelists. So again, that's menti.com. All right, looks like we're getting more folks signed in. And it's still up at the top on your screen, menti.com with code 26461538. And we're just going to have a short poll to just get a flavor again of who is in the room. And David, why don't we go ahead and start that first question. So geographic area, if you live in Sunnyvale, what district do you live in? It's okay if you live in Sunnyvale and don't know, that's an option. Or if you live outside of Sunnyvale, there's also an option for you. Okay. And it's nice to see that we have folks representing from neighboring cities. And then there's plenty of people who don't know what district they live in. That's okay. That's for us to do some more education around our district elections. We see District 2 is pretty well represented. Nice. All right, let's get to our second question. Tell us your gender. Let's see if we have a good mix of gender here. I see we have more women represented than men. All right, non-binary. Okay, let's go to our next question. Tell us your age. Okay, it's good. It looks like we have at least some young folks in the room. All right. And our next Oh, we have 8 seconds. There we go. All right, tell us if you feel comfortable, your race or ethnicity. Okay, we have a nice mix of different Asian groups. All right. Now here, you have an opportunity just free flowing. How are you feeling? And you can just write a word into the Mentimeter and we'll get a word cloud. Yeah, so it looks like there's lots of concern, there's sadness, there's some anxiety, and there's also hope and feeling encouraged and supported. Okay, and also some anger, curiosity, worry. Thank you. The next question. How concerned are you with the nationwide increase in anti-Asian hate incidents? It's a lot of concern. Okay. The next set of questions are around your experiences specifically in Sunnyvale. So the first question is, how welcome do you feel in Sunnyvale? Okay, so most folks feeling welcome and very welcome. That's really nice to hear. But, I want to acknowledge that, there's some that don't feel welcome or feel neutral. Next question. Do you feel safe walking in your neighborhood? Okay, and so it looks like some folks are certainly feeling very unsafe or unsafe, and that's concerning. even though most I'm glad to see feel very safe or safe. And the last question, what are your experiences in terms of witnessing or experiencing racial bias in Sunnyvale? And here you can choose more than one response. So here we're pretty split with 21%, around 20% of us experiencing racial bias, 36% witnessing racial bias, and 43% not experiencing that. Okay, so again, it's concerning. Thank you. Thank you for that and for sharing your experiences and letting us know who is in the room. I appreciate that. Before we start our panel discussion, we do have a special treat. Sunnyvale's own Flo Oi Wong, she's an artist, poet, and longtime resident of Sunnyvale, will read us some of her poetry about recent events. So we'd love to invite Flo.
Good evening. I'm happy to be on this panel, but at the same time, I'm saddened that the panel is needed. So I want to read two poems to you. I'm going to go close my door first. Close the door, please. The first poem is, it is 2021. It is 2021. During the COVID-19 pandemic, an explosive time of rising anti-Asian violence in America, Asians are attacked and killed. This land is your land, and this land is my land, from California to the New York Island. In Oakland, Chinatown, a 91-year-old man is violently shoved to the ground from behind. A few minutes later, the attacker then pushes a 60-year-old man and a 55-year-old woman onto the sidewalk. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. In New York, a 65-year-old Asian woman, battered by a man on the street, collapses in front of an apartment building. The perpetrator, a man who killed his mother in 2002, stomps on the 65-year-old woman repeatedly. Doormen shut the door to the apartment building. They do nothing to stop the stomper. As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway, saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. In Atlanta, 6 Asian women are shot by a white man who could not control his sex addiction. Blood flowing from the women's lifeless bodies flood the spa floor. I roamed and rambled, and I'd follow my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. This land was made for you and me. My second poem is titled Pools of Red. Gunshots pierce the air, then erupt in bodies of 6 Asian women. One by one, they screech their unforeseen terror in land of guns. Pools of red puddle the floor. The white gunman executes them because of a sex addiction that he could not control. Why didn't he shoot himself? A captain of the county sheriff department speaks after the tragedy. The officer says he had a really bad day, and this is what he did. What he did, shooting Asian women is now okay when someone has had a bad day. These sisters in my homeland, United States of America, are massacred in open season in which Asians, especially women, elder women, are now attacked. I am 83, Asian American woman, not safe.
Thank you, Flo. Those are moving and also heart-wrenching words, and I think they really speak to a lot of the feelings that are in the Asian community right now. So I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. And with that, let's try to unpack what is happening in the AAPI community right now, how it connects to racial justice overall, and how we can take action to address it. So I'd love to invite our panelists to please turn your video on. We have a great panel today, and we also have a packed agenda. So I'll just quickly introduce you. If you could just wave your hand. We have, first of all, you heard from Pastor Hardy Kim of Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church. We have Sarita Kohli from Asian Americans for Community Involvement, or Aapi. Richard Konda from Asian Law Alliance. Mimi Nguyen from the Vietnamese American Roundtable. We have Rajiv Singh from the Hindu American Foundation, Santa Clara County Supervisor Otto Lee, Fremont Union High School District Trustee Rosa Kim, Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen, and Sunnyvale's Department of Public Safety Chief Fawn No. Thank you all for being here and joining us. So we're going to get started by asking, we know what's happening nationwide. Over 3,800 incidents of anti-Asian hate nationwide, and sadly, with a concentration of that happening here in progressive Bay Area. We heard a little bit about what our Sunnyvale residents are feeling and have experienced. What are you hearing from the local AAPI community? And I'd like to start with Supervisor Otto Lee.
Good evening, and thank you so much for hosting this excellent event. Thanks to Mayor Larry Klein and Jackie from our Office of City Manager. Thank you for your good work. And very honored to be here with so many of our leaders in the community on such an important issue. This Asian hate crime is nothing new. If you look back in the history of the United States, way back in the 1870s, we have 15 Chinese being lynched right in Los Angeles. The 1882, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act that lasted until 1943. And of course, 1942, everybody do remember, regarding the Japanese internment after the Pearl Harbor. We have a long history of it, and I would say that this is really more like a new chapter of a very old book. Here in Sunnyvale, I'm certainly honored to be elected and formally in the Sunnyvale City Council and served on the council for 8 years as one of the first Asian American ever in this history. And of a history with demographics of over close to 40% Asian Americans in Sunnyvale. We certainly have extremely diverse community living in harmony. And frankly, we've been very fortunate, but at times we do see issues. For example, a couple of years ago, the incident of somebody trying to mow down Muslims was a motive, right on El Camino Real. It's something that certainly was shocking, but we clearly see that there's a lot of issues in our community that we need to work on. the county level, we have passed unanimously the resolution to denounce these anti-Asian hate violence. And the very next day, a Filipino woman was attacked at the tunnel in Diridon Station in the morning with somebody screaming "F you Asian" and all these despicable things. The issues is very real, very alive. Because coronavirus certainly had exacerbated it with the last president who say these awful words, blaming the virus with the Chinese or the Asians. I think it is really important that our community need to come together. Anti-Asian hate is not just anti-Asians. It really is hate against everybody. As we know, hate is not something that is inherited, it's learned. And one thing I would say, just like Assemblyman Berman mentioned earlier about the hate crime that was against the synagogues in Poway. I was there 2 years ago in San Jose City Hall, right after the Pittsburgh shooting of 10 attendees to a synagogue in Pittsburgh that died, alongside my colleague Susan Ellenberg, who actually grew up right across from the synagogue when she was growing up. It is absolutely something that we need to stand together. Our community really needs to come together. And I'm very honored to say how many people here, and when you look at the demographics here, close to half of the attendees here are white, identified as white. And I think it is really important to let everybody know that it is the totality of us, the diversity of us, that's standing together, whether we are Latinx, whether we are Muslim, whether we're Jewish, whether we're white, we're African American, all of us coming together in this very important time is what it takes. Bystander training is important. We actually talk about getting whistles and devices to make it really loud to seniors. And there's so many more things that we need to do working with our law enforcement, whether it's district attorney's office and our police officers for training. And so I'm so glad to see Chief No of our Sunnyvale City Public Safety is here as well, because we understand how important it is for all of us working together to move forward. And again, thank you very much for inviting us today for this extremely important dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you. And Rosa, would you like to chime in as well about what you're hearing from the local AAPI community?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to take part in this very important discussion. I would like to share my experience at two recent events. First is the virtual vigil for Atlanta shooting victims organized by the Bay Area K Coalition. Many members of the AAPI community attended and shared their thoughts on the recent rise of AAPI hate incidents and crimes. They shared how the victims look like their own relatives. Some of them were very worried for their safety of their families and friends. Safety is a basic need. When this is threatened, all of us are left feeling helpless. We urgently need to bring communities together to love and serve each other. For community-wide healing, we need to come together to discuss what is happening and what we can do. The best solution comes from the community, and we need to start the dialogue now. These were some of the thoughts shared among local Asian American community members. Second, I would like to share what I heard from a meeting with about 80 Korean language school teachers in Northern California. They're all female teachers. 2/3 of the participants said they experienced some sort of racial discrimination in public places, such as a market, schools, and their workplace. Most of them were very concerned that these hate incidents would cause their children to develop a negative self-image and lose their sense of pride as an Asian American. They wanted to know how they could educate their children and students to be proud American citizens. This is ongoing discussion I heard from the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. And, speaking about women, we know that women are twice as likely to report a hate-related incident I'd like to know, what role does gender play in these attacks? And we'll start with you, Sarita.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think you're very right in saying that, Asian women are particularly 2.3 times as likely to report than men are. I think gender plays a huge role, particularly in the API community, but overall as well, because these women are dealing not just with the racism, but also with sexism and the patriarchy and how hypersexualized images are presented in the media. And even the recent, attacks in Atlanta, sort of seem to imply that the women were somehow, to blame for the perpetrator's fetish or his sex addiction in some way. I think the fact is that the gender inequities definitely exist, and we know this. There's also the stereotype of, in general, Asians are considered, meek and quiet and, put your heads down and do your work. But women, it's twice as much that expectation and the stereotype that they're going to be docile and subservient. We have actually heard at Aapi from, some of our clients who have said that their partners turned violent when their behavior did not fit the stereotype that they were expecting from that particular ethnicity. So, that's something that they also have to contend with. We've also seen, women, particularly immigrants, who might have come here on a visa, which is associated with the spouse or a partner, feeling threatened. And so having to deal with that as well, because they're afraid of, being deported or, the children being taken away. And so I think it's for women, it's a double whammy at the very least, if not more than that. And that leads to, depression and isolation, and it impacts not just them, but their children as well. On Sunday, I was listening to NPR, and there was a story of this, high school kids that were interviewed in New York. And it broke my heart to hear this young girl say that, when the pandemic started, she's the daughter of a single mom. Mom takes the subway and goes to work every day. And she said, I would text my mom every 10 minutes to see that she was okay, because people were shoving people in front of trains and buses and all that kind of stuff. And she even recounted that as the train passed through a tunnel, there was no signal. And so mom was not responding. So even in those few minutes when the train was in the tunnel, this child is dealing with the trauma of not knowing if her mom has gotten hurt. And, trauma has long-term impacts. And these children are going to grow up with this kind of fear, which is very detrimental for them. So yes, gender plays a huge role and is just increasing the complexity of the trauma.
Thank you for sharing that, Sarita. And Mimi, would you want to chime in on this too?
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of what Sarita has mentioned. Since the inception of our country, like, women have been the marginalized and lesser sex. We continue to live in a male-dominated society that hasn't changed very much. We weren't given the right to vote, and that's what led to, the Women's Suffrage Act. And we're talking about white women at the time. And Asian women, like she said, is a double whammy. Like, we have the color on top of, the being the lesser and marginalized sex. Women have been more vulnerable and have been victim of violence and abuse in the home and in the workplace. And it wasn't until the last few decades where violence against women was looked at and being prosecuted and being reported more. Domestic violence it's pretty new for us, and it's finally being put in place where women are protected in terms of it being a criminal act, and even on the immigration level to protect people that are immigrants who are brought here or who live with their spouses and are afraid of deportation. And that's why we have the Violence Against Women Act that's put in place to protect those women. And even before that, like, women couldn't be raped by their husbands. And, you know, even if they didn't consent to it, it wasn't until the last few decades that we recognized that wives can be raped by their husbands. And so, like, for Asian women, the marginalization and stereotypes that we see in the media puts Asian women at a greater risk. Asian women are objectified, they're seen as sexual creatures, they're fetishized and viewed as submissive. And Sarita did mention some of that. And this has a really chilling effect because it puts Asian women at a much greater risk of being victims of violence based on these stereotypes. So I think it's really important for us as a community to change this narrative in order to combat the violence that Asian women face every day. And we have to have more representation and media coverage of what Asian women actually look like, and appropriate representation, and not just the stereotypes that we see.
Thank you. And this recent incidents are certainly highlighting that vulnerability. And so I'm glad there's an opportunity to speak to that. I appreciate it. So let's talk specifically about those hate-related incidents and crimes. Not all hate-related incidents are crimes. What's the difference between a hate incident and a hate crime? And what recourse do people have if they are victimized? We'll start with Jeff Rosen.
Good evening, Jackie, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you all and to be with you all. So very quickly, a hate incident is terrible, but it tends to be words. So it's ethnic slurs, or handing out leaflets with horribly racist material, or posting images on the internet with horribly racist material. But unless there's a physical action that follows, punching someone, pushing them, spray painting a swastika, some kind of vandalism, or threatening to do violence, without those things, it's a hate incident, which is a terrible thing, but it's not a crime. So just a quick way to think about the differences: words alone are hate instances. They happen much more frequently than hate crimes. And a hate crime it's that biased motivation that you're singling someone out because of their ethnicity, their race, their national origin, their sexual orientation. You're singling them out because of that. And then you push them, you punch them, you spit on them, you steal from them. Those are the distinctions. And the recourse for a victim of a hate crime is please call the police. Sunnyvale Police Department under Chief No is an excellent department, and they will investigate these crimes. But here's something I just want people to understand is hate crimes are way underreported. Why? Often the victims feel a sense of shame. It's my fault. I brought this upon myself. I shouldn't say anything. Or they have a certain distrust of law enforcement. Maybe they came from a country where you didn't trust the police, or they don't want to make a big deal out of it. I'm here, I don't want to make a big deal out of this. And so how do we overcome this? One way is bystanders, witnesses. The victim does not have to report this to the police. A bystander could report it. A witness could report it, and the police will investigate it. In fact, in Mountain View a few weeks ago, a Chinese American man was having lunch on Castro Street. It's a very nice street. Murphy Street in Sunnyvale, also a very nice street. I'm not trying to play favorites between the downtowns. Chinese American man is having lunch. A woman walks by, utters some horrible ethnic slurs against him for being Asian, and then spits on him. The spitting, that physical act, that's a crime. The man didn't want to report it. I don't want to report it. It's not a big deal. I don't want to do that. But the people that he was with encouraged him, and eventually they reported it. And then when the police began to investigate, okay, he would talk to the police then. So really, we encourage bystanders to report, even if the victim will not. And we encourage people to report it to the police. The last thing I would just say about that is, if you don't know, you're a bystander or you're a victim, you don't know, is this a hate incident or is it a hate crime? Call the police. Let the police investigate it. Even if it's only a hate incident, which is a horrible thing, you all know that. Let's have a police officer talk to the perpetrator and say, okay, so let me make sure I understand this. You called them what? You said what? And I'm sorry, why did you do that? Even if it doesn't become a prosecution, that interaction between the police officer and the perpetrator helps to reinforce what our values are here, which is empathy and inclusion and diversity. Thank you.
Thank you, District Attorney. And Chief, did you want to chime in on this as well?
Yeah, I just want to add that it's really important. The last thing that the District Attorney said about if you don't know whether it's a hate crime or a hate incident, please report to your local police department, or for the residents here in our city, to the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety, because of the underreporting issue that the District Attorney mentioned. But I believe that we have a role also in helping our community members deal with these issues, because I've talked to some of our residents before, and just people in the community. There's a sense of frustration from them because there's fear, there's anger from them, because when we go to these calls and we tell them that it doesn't rise to a level of crime, and that the District Attorney's Office most likely will not file charges, there's a huge sense of frustration for people, and we totally get it. But here in Sunnyvale, we do things a little bit differently. And a prime example of that is that when we had an incident last summer where one of our residents was walking out in his neighborhood enjoying the day, and a neighbor basically said a few ugly things to him in terms of he doesn't belong here in this country, and go back to where he comes from, where he came from, right? Really unsettling for the resident. He didn't know what to do. He didn't call us right away, but he contacted his neighborhood association leader, and that individual contacted me and the mayor. So we made the decision to set up a community meeting to talk to all the residents in that particular neighborhood, and we heard a lot of things that came out of that discussion that we had, that meeting that we had, and ultimately we explained the differences between a hate crime and a hate incident. But we did exactly what the District Attorney said. We follow up with the person who said those ugly things. Yeah, it didn't rise to the level of crime, but we felt it was important to make this person be aware of the harm that this person did to one of our residents. And it turned out to be actually a good interaction, because it turned out that this person had some mental health issues that caused him to behave that way. Regardless, I think it made the victim feel a lot better that we took the time and the effort to address the issue, even if it didn't rise to a level of crime. And I think that's important, that the support from the city that we showed.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that and your efforts. So let's talk a little bit more about resources. Richard, if you could share what resources are available to people who are impacted by these sort of incidents.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank all of you folks in Sunnyvale for inviting a San Jose person to participate. It's a great event. So many of us in the community that work at different nonprofits, I think we are there too as a resource for people. So maybe a person doesn't feel comfortable calling the police, or feels like they need to reach out in their own language to an organization. So they could call the Asian Law Alliance, or they could call Asian Americans for Community Involvement. There's a wide range of organizations, and all of us are concerned about this issue, and all of us have been kind of working together to figure out what's the best way to help people. So, you know, if a person were to call Asian Law Alliance, for example, you know, we would listen carefully, try to be supportive, try to figure out what kind of resources would help the person in terms of victim kind of services if they needed referral to counseling. We would help them file a report with the Stop AAPI Hate website. And then if it seemed like they wanted to pursue a criminal matter, we try to figure out, you know, what city are they from and how would they go about kind of following that up. So I think a lot of us in the community are there to figure out and be supportive of people who feel like they've been either the victim of an incident, hate incident, or a hate crime.
Thank you, Richard. I think it is important for people to just contact whoever they feel safe with, right? That's a really important point. So Rita, Aapi has specific services, you know, around mental health. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. You know, we have been doing this for almost 50 years now in Santa Clara County, and I want to give out our Aapi's number. It's 408-975-2730. And like Richard said, you know, we work very collaboratively with the organizations, that other organizations in Santa Clara County. And so, you know, if somebody calls, you know, we try and understand what their needs are. We offer counseling, we offer primary care services. You know, we have parenting groups at this point in time to help, you know, parents deal with not just how they should address issues coming up with the kids around pandemic, but also what will happen when they go back to school. Are they going to be faced with bullying and, you know, fear around that? We offer a lot of services for the seniors, and we want to make sure that they're not isolated and depressed because of having to, you know, stay home, first because they couldn't go out in the pandemic, and now because they can't go out because of fear. And so we offer those services as well. And if there was something that we couldn't help them with, I mean, we do have a domestic violence shelter. We also put up people in hotels when our shelter is full. And so those could be, by the way, males as well, who could be victims of human trafficking or domestic violence. And, you know, if we couldn't help them, then we would reach out to sister organizations like Asian Law Alliance, you know, and others and support them in that way. But I think what is most important is for people to know that, you know, we provide culturally sensitive care. We understand the challenges that people are facing right now. Our services are totally trauma informed. And, you know, we encourage people to reach out, and we will do our best to serve them.
Thank you, Sarita. And I just want to let everybody know that we are going to put, if it's not on there already, we're going to put a list of resources on our website under the invitation, and that will certainly include the Asian Law Alliance and Aapi. And so that will be available for folks to look up on our website shortly.
I hear you.
Jackie, you're muted.
I want to go back to something a couple people mentioned, which is bystanders. And, you know, sometimes people are hesitant to jump in when they see an incident. So one of the things that is available, you know, or is potentially bystander training. So what can bystanders do if they witness a hate incident or crime? And Richard, I'll ask you to respond to that.
Yeah, and actually, I would really encourage people to look up the bystander intervention trainings. There's a series of trainings, and for me to kind of in a couple minutes talk about really what's the best thing to do, I hesitate to do that. I would just say the main thing the message here would be to be supportive of the victim and to see, you know, what can you do if the victim needs help or whatever, the victim needs 911 called, or if it needs medical care or just needs some support. That's the most important thing. But kind of while we're talking about this, I'd also say that one of the things we need to think about here is, you know, if you're with your family, once we're able to get together, or you're with your office mates, once we're able to go back to the office, and if you hear somebody make a racist comment, we really can't let that go anymore. Because these things kind of start with a small thing, and if we let it go, it just needs to stop. So I would say on that point, I think all of us need to really stand up. And even if you're at a family get together and Uncle George is going off again, as he always does, I don't think we can let Uncle George do that anymore. Really, I think so. All of us need to take that responsibility to really speak up, whether it be your coworkers, your family members, anybody in a social setting. I think it's real important.
Thank you, Richard. And beyond what our individual actions are, let's hear a little bit more about what our leaders are doing to combat hate-related crimes and incidents. And let's start with Supervisor Otto Lee.
Thank you, Jackie. In the county of Santa Clara, we certainly have voted to pass the resolution, right, to condemn the anti-hate incidents and crime. But in addition to that, we really need more action. So one of the things that we've done is trying to reach out to come up with some work that has already been doing. For example, there's already a body of work against hate crime in this county of Santa Clara. And so that type of hate crime task force, we need to make sure that we activate it to work more closely with the AAPI community as well. A lot of times people look at hate crime as more against the Latinx community and African community or Jewish community, but as we know, it is really for everybody. So I think it's really important to engage these different areas. We talked about purchasing these loud devices to give, like this head like in the lanyard or along the wrist to give to people. It costs about $5 a piece. We just actually passed in the budget of $10,000 of it to purchase at least 2,000 of these units to be given out to a lot of our Asian seniors. I think these are all little things that we can do to give people confidence to feel safe when they're out there, right? Because there's a lot of fear right now in the community. And to make sure it's a deterrent for the perpetrators to know that they can't get away with these things. And I did get a note also earlier from Councilmember Mason Fong in Sunnyvale talking about creating a Office of Cultural Inclusion to deal with these type of issues, to get the community engaged to talk about these issues. Because at the end of the day, as I say, hate is not something that you're born with, it's learned. So it's really an educational process that we need to get people to understand better. Unfortunately, with some of our social bubbles as the social media, a lot of people tends to keep getting the same type of news and same circles. And I think it is so important that we're able to give that type of cultural education. And in our school, we have the ethnic studies that I think is really important. That's included to our schools, but at the same time, how about the adults? How about the older generations? Those jokes that Jay Leno used to make fun of Asians, now he's apologizing, saying those are not acceptable, right? It becomes a generational issues as well. Like you talk about Uncle George, like Richard was talking about. It is really important that in our own family, we need to be able to say that. And it's not just against Asian, right? I mean, among Asian families, we always know somebody who's have other enemies against other races as well, right? We all know who they are. And I think it's so important that this dialogue really is for everybody. And I think whether at the government level or the family level, it's a lot of education, a lot of dialogue that needs to happen.
Thank you. I think that certainly does start, with the home and with education. What about the law enforcement side? What are our law enforcement leaders, Chief and District Attorney Jeff Rosen? What is law enforcement doing to address this issue specifically?
A number of things. Number one, when a hate crime is committed and we file that charge, we prosecute it very vigorously. We don't sweep it under the rug. There's been a number of examples, right? One most recently, Dearborn Station, Filipino woman pushed to the ground, horrible slurs uttered against her, an attempted rape charge. And we charged that as a hate crime, assault with intent to commit rape, assault with great bodily injury, and a hate crime allegation. So number one, we named it for what it was. And that does a couple things. Number one, it adds additional time for which the perpetrator can be held accountable. So that's kind of the hard power law enforcement response. Not the only one, but I'm saying one response is you commit this crime, we're going to call it what it is, we're going to prosecute you very vigorously, you're going to serve time. However, that's the end of the line. That's the terrible thing happened, and we're holding the perpetrator accountable. We have victim services unit in the DA's office. We help the victim, right? But what do we really want to do? We don't want this to happen in the first place. I want to put myself out of business in prosecuting hate crimes. So a couple ways that we try to achieve that. Number one, under the law, when someone commits a hate crime, the judge is encouraged to sentence that offender, in addition to jail or prison time, to do community service with a group of the ethnicity of that victim, or to take educational classes to learn about the history of that victim. This is it's the only thing I've ever seen in the law where a judge is encouraged to do this. And why? We're trying to change hearts and minds. I mean, the hate crime perpetrator that we prosecute today for the crime, God willing, when that person sees a hate crime happening, he will be an upstander and intervene. That's really what we want to see. Secondly, a year ago, when there started to be an uptick in hate instances against Asian Americans that was being reported because of comments about Kung flu and the China virus, we put together very quickly in the DA's office a 56-second PSA explaining that people are not viruses, and with a very diverse group within the DA's office of Asian Americans and Latinos and African Americans and Jews, et cetera, men and women. And the message is, and if you do a crime like this, you're going to have a lot more to worry about than just COVID-19. So that's the second thing we did. Why? We're trying to deter perpetrators. We're trying to empower victims, encourage them to report by saying, you report or bystander reports, we take this seriously. And number three, we're trying to do our best to remind our community of what our values are, which is we don't tolerate this. We celebrate diversity. We want to be nice and warm and empathetic to people. Last thing we're doing is in the DA's office, we have something called asset forfeiture funds. When criminals steal things and they steal money or they make money selling drugs, the proceeds of those crimes are taken from them and they're given to different law enforcement agencies. We're taking some of that money and we're going to be announcing in a few weeks a grant opportunity for different community-based organizations in our county who are working specifically in the space of preventing hate crimes against Asians, hate crimes against African Americans, hate crimes against everyone, organizations that are encouraging mutual tolerance and respect amongst all of us. So we're trying to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to these things. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief, did you want to chime in about what you're doing?
Yeah, I want to say that I think we all recognize here that hate does not respect boundaries. And collectively, this is our problem. It's not a Sunnyvale problem. It's everybody's problem. So the Police Chiefs Association, a couple of weeks ago, pushed out a letter showing very strong support for our AAPI community and taking a very strong stance against hate crimes in our community. And the things that we have been doing over the years, making sure that our officers are well trained on the recognition of hate crimes, how to identify and investigate hate crimes. You know, we're putting more of an emphasis on that at this point. And each chief does things differently. I know that other police chiefs have gone out and done outreach with their respective communities because they have specific neighborhoods that have a high concentration of Asian residents. You know, for Sunnyvale, we're all spread out. So it's not something that we're doing, but tonight's event is something specifically that we're doing, you know, that I'm participating in to show support for our community, for our AAPI community. For myself personally, I am a member of the Santa Clara County Hate Crimes Task Force that was recently created. And I see a few panel members here that are on that task force also. I'm looking forward to the work that we're going to be doing in that task force. It is a holistic, comprehensive approach on dealing with hate crimes. It's not law enforcement centric, which I believe is appropriate because it's all of our problems. I'll be participating in a meeting tomorrow with the police chiefs from San Mateo County, along with some police chiefs in our county, because we recognize that we need to work together to eliminate this hate from our community. And so I'm looking forward to a conversation with the other chiefs. We know that we don't have all the answers, but certainly if we put in the effort and work together, we'll have the answers to address this. And so those are things that we're doing in law enforcement.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. And like you said, law enforcement is not the only solution. And some worry that too much emphasis on that could be counterproductive. So let's explore what are other paths that we should be pursuing. And we'll start first with Pastor Hardy-King.
Thank you, Jackie. As District Attorney Rosen already said, by the time it gets to hate crime, it's already too late. And that's not something we want to address. I think about the older woman in Chinatown who I found a lot of AAPI folks posting on social media celebrating her ability to fend off her attacker, but I couldn't find any joy in that. The fact that she had to fight for her life in that way, and the fact that she says now that she was so traumatized, she doesn't even feel like she can leave her home anymore. That to me is not a good outcome, right? Justice in the form of retribution is not going to restore that person. So I also think back to 1992 in Los Angeles and the uprising there, right? And the kind of racially charged violence. And it really was a situation that got beyond the control of law enforcement. So I love the fact that we have a very proactive and engaged public safety department here in Sunnyvale. But I think as Asian Pacific Islander Americans and citizens of this country and community members, there's so much more we need to do before any of these things happen in terms of building right relationships with everybody in the community around us and calling people to higher standards of how they treat one another. As folks have said here, there is a long history of hate in California that was born in California. Supervisor Lee mentioned so many things that have happened here and that have influenced national policies and international policies here. And so I think we need to get more engaged as Asian Pacific Islander Americans in, trying to address some of the disagreements and frictions that exist between our communities. And particularly, I would say for folks, all BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, there are ways in which the system forces us to compete with each other or makes us think we're competing with each other. And so I think not just building up resources within our own communities, but taking the time to go beyond and to build those links, those connections, those relationships that will get us through times of crisis, right? I don't think we can ignore the fact that so many of the hate crimes that have been perpetrated against API folks have not been committed by white folks, right? It's not that this isn't a part of the dynamics of white supremacy in our society, but there are ways in which us not having invested our time in connecting with others in the world around us leaves us very exposed and without the resources we need to address this type of situation now.
Thank you. And, I think one of the things that you were alluding to was this idea of the model minority, right? And I recently read an article in the Washington Post by Jeff Chang, who's an author and Race Forward senior advisor. And he argued that the AAPI community has long been pegged as the model minority and has suffered that stereotype built on a foundation of racial hierarchy and intended to perpetuate white supremacy. And so, that can be really harmful to the community and all communities of color and everyone. And it seems like because of that, this is almost cyclical, and we need to figure out what the root cause and how to address it. And I'd like to bring in Rajiv Singh to comment on that.
So Jackie, first of all, glad to be here. Thank you for making this panel as diverse as it is today, not just racially, but also the different expertise that we all bring to this conversation. I'm representing the Hindu American Foundation. I'm bringing that voice to this panel. And the reason I'm kind of identifying that is because hate crime or crime is crime doesn't matter. But a lot of times when we use the word Asian, we forget that even Indians are Asians. There's crime in that or against that demographic as well. So that said, first of all, you can find us at hinduamerican.org. The reason I'm sharing that website with you is because you brought up the word model minority. One of the interesting dynamics that the immigrant Indian, the Hindu American demographic is associated with is high-tech industry in one form or the other. They're a high per capita income group, and there is that hesitation to go to law enforcement as readily as maybe other Americans are likely to do. Maybe there's a disbelief that this could happen to Indian Americans or Hindu Americans. Maybe there is a hesitation for what that procedural wake will look like, what that runway will look like, but whatever it is. So keeping that in mind, I want to highlight that if there are Hindu Americans or Indian Americans who have experienced some sort of an identity-based incident or a bias motivated incident or harassment, then on our website there is a anti-Hindu hate, Hindu phobia incident form. They can all fill that out. The reason this is important is because this does not take them directly to law enforcement if they choose to do so, but rather provides them with that expertise that we have available in counseling or even figuring out if this was really a hate crime or not, and then guide them to the right resources such as either the PD or the DA's office. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that we talked about senior citizens, we talked about adults, but let us not forget what is also happening in our schools. There is in our high schools, in our middle schools. Let us look at bullying, for example, which in my opinion is also a crime, may not involve weapons or shoving, but certainly leaves Asian Americans, Hindu Americans scarred, and perhaps in this case, scarred for life. So if you go to our website, you will find a lot of resources available to help both the educators and parents to identify, well, what does bullying look like? How can we prevent it in a school setting? But more importantly, there is a webinar which we have posted over there that talks about what does bullying look like in these times of COVID in the cyber world. We may not all realize, but this may be happening not just on the streets, but also online. How do we identify it? How do we address it? What can we do about it? Whose jurisdiction does that fall in? How do I even report cyberbullying? Who do I report it to? Do I go to Chief No for that, or where do I go for that, right? So that is that. There are also recommendations for parents. What if you're a parent of a high school student, a high school Asian student who was bullied? What do we do as parents? Who do we go to in that scenario? So the reason I'm pointing all this out is because we have thought about it a lot. We have a lot of resources for it. So please do reach out to us, contact us, hinduamerican.org. But let us also start looking at the curriculum. What's happening? What are we teaching in schools? What resources are we utilizing? I mean, let us not forget, we've seen this enough in the last 4, 5, 6, 8 years that our media is not unbiased. I mean, we have all sorts of stereotypes peddled, all sorts of nonsense and garbage being thrown 24/7 at us. The standards of journalism are just nowhere any close to being as objective as we expect and hope they are. So how do we in schools, if I'm an educator, what do I do to get hold of a good resource online to utilize in my school activities, to utilize in my to teach ethnic curriculum that we have just come up with? How do I make sure that that piece of news article, even from NPR, is not perpetrating hate or peddling hate, or is not reporting something that is false? So the reason I'm sharing it is because I want to highlight that there is this concern that we have, the rise of hate is happening in many, many segments, in many, many facets of our life, especially with our kids, and we should pay attention to it as well. And we have plenty of resources, and I just wanted to draw attention to that. So I'll stop here for now.
Thank you. You do bring up education, so I'd love to bring in Rosa to comment on that.
Our panelists, cover many great points or excellent points. I'll be happy to add to that. We need to celebrate our differences and diversity with open hearts. The more opportunities we create to recognize the importance of diversity in the community, the more our community members will understand and embrace our differences. I believe that deeper understanding will lead to greater empathy among ethnic groups. I was a Korean language school teacher for over 10 years. Through the years I spent with my students, I realized that the more they learn about a subject, the more interest they develop. This can be applied to our current situation. We need to create more opportunities to educate students and inform the community about our immigrant history and the contribution immigrants make to our society. May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We can create multiple opportunities in our schools and the local community to raise awareness and celebrate the contribution of the AAPI community. As Supervisor Lee mentioned, recently California's Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum was approved by the State Board of Education. The model curriculum includes 13 sample lesson plans on Asian American and Pacific Islander studies. It covers the model minority myth and lesson plans on each Asian ethnic group. The lesson plans were originally designed for high school students, but the themes and topics could be modified for younger students. This kind of effort to raise awareness about AAPI immigrant history should be one of the solutions we pursue.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about what we as community members can do to support the AAPI community. And, you know, as we just mentioned, this is an issue that impacts all communities of color in general. How can we work together, and what does solidarity look like? And I'll start with, or I'll ask Richard Konda to start.
I mean, we've been working together on various issues. So for example, some of us worked very closely together around Proposition 16. It was a broad-based kind of effort that had a lot of different organizations, Asian Pacific American, Latinx, Black, other folks, progressive people. And I think that kind of work together is real important. And now with this Stop AAPI Hate work, again, very similar kind of coalition has been forming, and we're actually trying to think of a name for the South Bay Coalition, but we're planning a series of events, so stay tuned and we'll certainly keep in touch with you around those events.
Thank you. Pastor Hardy Kim.
Yeah, I think this is a great question and a key question for us to carry forward. I think that I've mentioned so many bad things about the history related to AAPI folks in California, but there's a really great one, right? In 1968, Asian Pacific Islander students, along with Latino and Chicano students, banded together with the Black Student Union at Berkeley and at San Francisco State, and they formed this thing called the Third World Liberation Front. They recognized that they were in a common struggle for racial justice, right? The reason this is a cycle is because every time there's anxiety about the shifting demographics, about the economic prospects for those who are currently in power, then again, you get this hate and this sort of animus against people who are marginal, who are emerging in ways and finding ways to find a home in this society. So until we address this, until we all come together on this, there won't be a solution to this. So for me, one of the main things about what solidarity looks like for the AAPI community is not just asking other people to show up for us when our rights, when our lives are on the line, but for us as AAPI folks to learn the history of this, right? No matter when your family or you came to this country, to learn the history of what has taken place in this country, and then to get committed to working for justice for all people, especially those who are vulnerable and marginalized, right? I speak as a faith leader. And so I'm motivated by that. And my faith tradition teaches me that the divine always wants us to be on the side of the oppressed, right? And sometimes that's us. And we want other people to be with us and God to be with us when that happens. But in order for that sort of ethos to be real in our lives, we have to live that out for others. So for me, solidarity looks like us standing up every time somebody is subject to hate, whether it rises to the crime of a level of a legal crime or not. We have to be there to advocate for others and show our commitment to this and build up a broad community that will stand up against hate.
Thank you, Pastor. Mimi, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I definitely would. So I think as community members, we all can do some work. Individually, we can do internal work to educate ourselves and learn, like Pastor Hardy Kim had mentioned, talking and having these conversations with our families and our children, and for us to check our own implicit biases that we have to challenge each other to do better. We all have room to do better. And we can learn about the history, the racism against AAPIs, and then make sure that the curriculum is being taught in schools like Rosa had mentioned earlier. Talk to your friends, your families, your neighbors, and see how you can support them and provide them with a safe space to talk. It's really important right now. People are still in the process of healing and processing what's going on. So this trauma is still very new and very current. Just provide space for people to talk. And then other things that we can do is get civically engaged, look at the policies, see how they disproportionately affect the AAPI community and the BIPOC communities. Look at whether these policies are there and whether or not there's access to resources in the various languages that are spoken by AAPI communities. We have to hold our government agencies accountable to their policies and not to group all AAPI communities together. There's so much data out there about Asian people, but we're all clustered together, but we're all so different. We face different challenges. And this gives us a very skewed perception of what the Asian community's needs are and what they're like. So we really have to disaggregate those data so that we know how to support each of the AAPI communities out there. And then we can also volunteer and collaborate with nonprofits and grassroots organizations that are doing these racial equity work. And I mean, we all have a role to play. And if you don't have the time to put in the work, then you can also donate to these organizations or, provide the skill sets that you have that can benefit them and help the community in some way. We all have a role to play, whether it's big or small, it all makes a difference. And we just have to take that accountability and support each other to learn. And, you know, no one group is in this alone. We're all in it together. And that's what solidarity looks like to me. Like, we have to stand together. Like Pastor Kim had mentioned, we stand together at all times, and we have that responsibility to do that.
Thank you. This has been a really insightful discussion. I want to end our panel just asking each of you to just take a few seconds, because we're already a little bit behind on time, to just tell us one thing that you want the audience to take away from tonight's gathering. And we'll start with Sarita.
Oh, thank you, Jackie. I'll be brief. I think what I want people to take away is speak up, show up, stand up for all communities.
Thank you, Sarita. Richard.
Jackie kind of mentioned it, and I think this is something for further research and discussion and thought, is really the concept of white supremacy and how white supremacy really is kind of really the core of this. And we just need to remember that, you know, that white supremacy, that this nation was built on slavery. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Mimi.
I would just like to say that we can all stand together against hate, violence, and racism, and that's not socially acceptable or tolerated in any of our communities.
Thank you. Rajiv?
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you again for participating, for letting me participate. I want to remind everybody that most of us, at least in Bay Area, most Asian Americans are immigrants. That this is a land of immigrants. We belong here just like everybody else. We have the same rights. So let us stand up and speak up for all the injustices that our community is facing and will also likely face in the future. Let's be honest about it. This is not going to be the end of it, right? But at the same time, I also want to urge the community members, the Aapi community members, the Asian Americans, the Indian Americans, the Hindu Americans, to also understand what is the role of policymaking in all of this, right? And the reason I want to say that is because in the rush, under the obligation, with the good intent of fixing these issues, what we are likely to see is our policymakers make decisions to fix these short term, right away. And it is our obligation to educate them on the nuances in the history and remind them of what this might lead to in other parts of our society, either in terms of discrimination or complaints or whatnot. So in short, I would like to kind of put the ball in our court again, to engage more with in the civic process with our policymakers, lawmakers, and work with them to solve this issue.
Thank you. Chief?
So thank you, Jackie. So I just want to say, as a young refugee growing up in the Bay Area, I lived in Mountain View as a kid, and I was at the Gemco with a friend of mine, and he was a new immigrant to this country, didn't speak English. We spoke Vietnamese. A lady, a Caucasian lady, standing behind us in line said, you know, speak English. You know, don't speak what you're speaking. We paid for you to be here. And the store clerk that was there heard the introduction, didn't say anything. So when I was going to junior high school in Mountain View, it was almost a daily occurrence where some kids would say things like, you know, boat people, go back home, making comments like eating dogs. I got into fights with some of those kids, and I told my teachers what happened, but nothing happened. So when I went to school, San Jose State University, I was in a class with my fellow classmates, and the professor asked, why aren't there that many Asian officers in law enforcement? And one of my classmates said, well, you know, Asians, small stature, no command presence, not articulate. don't make good officers. The professor didn't say anything. That was about 30 years ago. I'm glad to see that things have progressed a lot since then, because we have a group of folks here that are committed to making changes, right? But in a way, I think we've gone back a lot of steps, because what happened a couple of weeks ago in Georgia, I never experienced before. I've been in this job for a long time. And the only time that I said something to my wife and I kissed her goodbye before going to work was about 2 weeks ago, when I told her, I said, hey, be careful when you're out and about. And she's a Vietnamese American. And that really kind of rocked me a little bit. Like, why did I even say this? You know, so in a way we made some progress, but we've taken a lot of steps back also. So I'm hoping that tonight is just the beginning, you know, for all of us to work on this issue, because there's a lot of work ahead of us, and it does really impact people. And I totally agree with what Hardy said earlier. You know, it's not the crime itself. It's what is being said to people. And as you can see, I mean, these comments were made to me, you know, 30, 40 years ago, but I can still remember them vividly. And so when we talk about addressing these issues, don't think about these things as hate crimes. You know, think about these things as hate. And they're equally insidious as a hate crime. And we need to work on those things. And so I thank you very much for you know, the city for allowing me the opportunity to take part in this. And I'm honored to be, you know, working with all of you on this particular issue. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for your leadership and for being an example, because representation matters. Thank you for that. And speaking about representation, Supervisor Otto Lee.
Thank you, Jackie. The one takeaway I want people to see is look at Chief No, look at myself. We are both immigrants to this country, but we are no less American than anybody who is here. Chief No has served honorably for decades and is now the head of public safety, both the police and fire chief of Sunnyvale. I have served over 20 years in the U.S. Navy, including a tour in Iraq and earned a Bronze Star. We certainly have served a lot in our different capacity, and now in Sunnyvale City Council and also in Santa Clara County as your supervisor. I think it's so important for people to understand that the skin color does not determine whether you're American, because America, it is a nation of immigrants. And for those who don't understand what I'm talking about, go read the placard underneath the Statue of Liberty. This is who we are. This is exactly what this nation is about. And that's what makes us so amazing as a country. And by that token, I do want to have a corollary to mention that after Pearl Harbor, it is perfectly okay to have discussed against the Japanese Empire that bombed Hawaii. But it's not okay, it's not constitutional to be interning and jailing these Japanese Americans who are 100% Americans in mainland, especially in light of the fact that not a single German got interned. And by the same token, we might right now have a lot of discuss about the North Korean regime or the Chinese Communist regime for all those other reasons, but do not divert that hate to people who look Asian in America. And I just want to make sure it's a very important takeaway that these the world politics has somehow gotten into people's psyche and starting to hate people with Asian faces and blaming the virus and all those. And I think it's so important to make sure that people understand we are all Americans here. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. District Attorney Rosen.
Chief, no, I don't know what grade the San Jose State professor gave you in that class, but I give him an F for not being an upstander, you know, for being a decent human being in that moment. perhaps he did other things that were better. Very briefly, the DA's office looks like this community, is diverse like this community, represents this community, and will fight for this community. So if you're a victim of a crime or you see a crime, call the police. We'll take it seriously. We don't care what you look like. You're a resident here. We're going to treat you with respect and compassion. And if you're a hate crime, if you're a victim of a hate crime, we're not only going to hold that perpetrator accountable, we're not only going to try to change the heart and mind of that perpetrator, we're going to support you as the victim of that crime and make you feel welcome here because you belong here just like anybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. And Trustee Rosa Kim?
Yes, I came to the US with my 18-month-old daughter, and I learned being a good US citizen with my daughter. When I took my daughter to playground, she wanted to play alone. I mean, she didn't want to play together with other kids on the playground. And why? And then she said, I'm different from them. I talked to her, being different is not a bad thing. We live all together. So this is a defining moment for the AAPI community. And we need to work continuously to take action and make change for our next generation.
Thank you. And we'll end with Pastor Hardy Kim.
First, I just want to start by expressing my gratitude to everybody else on this panel for sharing your own experiences. There's so much that I relate to, and I'm very moved by a lot of them. But I really want us to remember what Richard Konda said about the history of this country, that there are flaws. As great as the potential of our society and our country is, there are flaws. There has been injustice. So, I'm the child of immigrants. I'm grateful to my parents for the journey that they took to offer the kind of life that I can have now. But if I take that and I only go so far as to dream of having a successful, comfortable life as a good law-abiding citizen in this country, then I think I will not have done enough to serve my AAPI community or this country enough. I think that all of us, regardless of background, and I'm very mindful that there are so many attendees of this event who are white, who are joining in this conversation because they want to do something to help. So for all of us, it's not enough to simply be good law-abiding citizens. We can be revolutionary, transformative, healing leaders that can actually fulfill the real potential of the United States by working for a just and peaceable society. So that's what I would like us all to be committed to.
Thank you, Pastor. Beautiful words to end our panel. I want to thank all of our panelists for all of your insightful comments and your personal stories. I think it's really been beneficial to further this conversation. And now I actually want to invite our audience members, if you would like to share a story or just your thoughts around the topic, add to the discussion, please feel free to press the *9 feature if you want to speak, or if you're on the phone, or the raise your hand feature, and we will get you in the queue. And each of you will have 2 minutes to share your comment. And David, I see that there's 5 people that would like to speak right now.
First up is Ed, followed by Richard Mellinger. Ed, you've been unmuted and you have 2 minutes to address the Unity Gathering. Ed, you should see a pop-up on your screen asking you to unmute. So Ed, we're going to move on to Richard and we'll come back to you in just a moment. Richard Mellinger, you've been unmuted. You have 2 minutes to address the city, or to address the Unity Gathering.
Hi, first off, I wanted to thank all the panelists and participants, and especially Assistant City Manager Guzman, for an excellent and informative and moving panel. I had a question for the city. which is that we're going to be having a study session on the potential Office of Cultural Inclusion on May 4th. And I was wondering how this office might be able to help address concerns regarding anti-AAPI violence in terms of equity and inclusion as well. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate the city for putting this on.
Thank you, Richard. I'll just very quickly say that as we will share more on the cultural study issue on May 4th, but I think we recognize that equity, diversity, and inclusion and racial justice is going to be a major component of what this, whether it's an office or just staff efforts around cultural inclusion, that is going to be a central topic and something that will certainly involve our Asian American community and the issues that are happening now.
Next up is Ed, followed by Julia Liu. Ed, hoping you can see that pop up on your screen, asking you to unmute. Okay, Ed, we're not hearing you, so we'll come back to you at the end. Next up is Julia Liu, followed by Lane Manley. Julia, you've been unmuted. You have 2 minutes to address the City Council.
Thank you for holding this event, and thank you to Jackie and all the panelists. I feel more hopeful after hearing from you all. I'd like to share two thoughts. First, I immigrated to this country almost 54 years ago with my parents, and I've lived in Sunnyvale for the last 35 years. Other than the first time when I was 12 years old, being called chink or ching chong or pulled eyelids are nothing. And I've always just shrugged and said, idiot. Well, things have become very different. I still walk around our neighborhood with my husband, but last week I had to really think about it for my dentist appointment. It's a 14-minute walk and the weather was lovely. I finally decided to chance it, but I also prepared for it. I put my sports headband on, so I look like the Karate Kid, put on my running shoes, and I brought a whistle. That was 10 a.m. in Sunnyvale. Paranoid, maybe, but better safe than sorry. My second thought. So I've been learning about the plight of the mobile home residents in Sunnyvale. They own their mobile homes, but they have to pay rent for the land space the mobile home has to sit on. Now, the word mobile doesn't mean mobile. Mobile homes can't be moved like an RV. So they're stuck. Their future is completely dependent on what the owner of the land wants to do. They want to treat you nice? Lucky you. They want to raise your rent by a lot? Well, that's just too bad for you. I suddenly had an epiphany. As Asian Americans are the forever foreigners, even after many generations, then I'm in the same boat as mobile home residents. The home and land I own and all the security it signifies is no more than a mobile home that sits on the real owner's land. My future is completely dependent on how the real owner wants to treat me. I and even my American-born children will never truly own nor belong to the land that's for you and me. That is extremely sad. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Next up is Elaine Manley, followed by Michael Say. Elaine, you've been unmuted and you have 2 minutes to address the City Council.
Thank you very much, David. And thank you, Jackie. This was an outstanding conversation. I've been to some of the rallies and we'll be at the one in Cupertino, but this was unique in the way that this was handled. And I just want to comment, I mean, this was really, really powerful. It was obviously very heartfelt by each speaker. Everyone was so well spoken, and it was great to hear all of the ideas of how we can work together as a community. I actually am an immigrant as well. I was born to German parents. I was adopted by an American family that brought me to the US when I was 2. So I'm extremely saddened by the discrimination and the hate and the violence that others have been experiencing. But I'm hopeful and optimistic by all of the words that I heard of everyone wanting to work together. I think that really is the key. Just outstanding meeting and still reflecting on what everyone said. I do want to make a quick statement as the league. now I'm going to put on my hat as the League of Women Voters of Cupertino Sunnyvale co-president. Our league does want to make a statement here that the league stands with the Asian American Pacific Islander community and our allies committed to social and racial justice. We feel it's important to stand together and stop verbal abuse or violence against AAPI or anyone for that matter. We encourage all of our community to stand up to racism, champion equality, and work to eradicate violence. Everyone should be treated with kindness and respect, not hostility and harassment. So let's work together and honor and recommit to our values as a nation built on the labor of immigrants and respectful of the inherent dignity of all people. Thank you very much.
Next up is Michael Say, followed by Naomi Nakano. Michael, you've been unmuted and you have 2 minutes to address the City Council.
Hello.
We can hear you, Michael.
Is my audio coming through?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Michael Tsai, currently serving on the Milpitas School Board here in a personal capacity. Again, I'm glad that we're having these conversations all over our cities. It's not just a city by city issue, it's affecting us all over. I did want to say, I feel like in some parts of our community, even though we're supposedly a deep blue county, there are some people who are still trying to downplay the reality of this racism or even turn a blind eye to it or pretend it's really not that bad. I feel like we can't really begin to take the action steps until we get everyone on the same page to acknowledge that this even is a problem. I introduced a resolution to stop AAPI hate at a school board meeting, and some people were like, oh, immediately jumped in. They're like, oh, this isn't really an issue. They kept citing that, oh, there's been no reported hate crimes. It's not really an issue. And frankly, I found that really disturbing because we have to understand that just because something isn't reported doesn't mean it's not happening. Secondly, just because there's no physical violence involved, maybe it doesn't rise to the level of a prosecutable hate crime, that the hateful language and attitudes are still an issue. And this sort of hateful language and attitudes is where it all begins. The Japanese American internment didn't just start at zero and with turn into Asian Americans being put into camps. It began with a widespread demonization, hate and hostility, and hateful attitudes towards Asian Americans. So even as we look at physical violence, we need to understand that the root of this is in hateful attitudes and hateful beliefs that are being promoted and circulated and being rewarded. Unfortunately, there are those in our community who do try to promote this kind of hate in order to for their own political gain, and we need to call that out. We need to stop those who try to consort with those who would promote racism and hate.
Next up is Naomi Nakano. Naomi, you've been unmuted and you have 2 minutes to address the group.
Thank you. My name is Naomi Nakano Matsumoto. I am a Sunnyvale resident, and my husband is a Sunnyvale native, having grown up, born and raised here, and having gone through the Sunnyvale school systems. I am also a trustee with the Fremont Union High School District Board. I want to thank the city of Sunnyvale for putting together this event and the opportunity to have dialogue. I really appreciate they taking the step to do so. I do want to, ask everyone to be aware that the Asian Pacific Islander community is very diverse, and not only with probably at least 50 different communities, but over 100 different languages. And even within that, there is a huge diversity of when each of our families have come here. So we all face maybe different issues, but we all are looked upon as the same. My own family came here in the late 1800s. I'm third generation Japanese American. My children are fourth generation. I have cousins who are living all over the United States, who are blonde-haired, blue-eyed, who have the last name of Nakano. And so they experience life very differently and maybe hate differently than I would or my kids do here. But to be able to make sure that we are looking at the entire continuum of Asian Pacific Islander history here in the United States. And so just wanted to add that perspective. Again, thank you for hosting this event.
I do not see any other individuals having raised their hand indicating a desire to speak. We do have another speaker. Tara Martin-Milius, you've been unmuted and you have 2 minutes to address the group.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the city for convening this event. Jackie, you did a lovely job of managing this. Thank the panelists for all their thoughts and their contributions to help us all understand better how we might help along the way and how we might address past wrongs as well. So I would also like to say that Leadership Sunnyvale stands with the AAPI and all BIPOC people against racism. Thank you so much.
Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak? So please raise your digital hand or dial *9 on your phone. Jackie, it looks like that was our final speaker.
Okay, I just want to thank everyone for your comments. Let you know that in the chat, I did put a link to our website with resources. And now I would like to invite Councilmember Fong to say a few words, or sorry, Mayor, are you gonna close? Okay, then I'll invite the Mayor to say a few closing words. Mayor?
Sure, and I just want to thank everyone again for joining tonight's AAPI Unity Gathering. And I want to thank Jackie for a stupendous job managing this conversation tonight. It's been very informative. It was a really informative discussion, and I thanks to all the panelists for their insightful and heartfelt comments. And I especially want to express my gratitude to those of you who shared your stories, your concerns, and your vision for a better Sunnyvale. Sunnyvale is committed to the racial equity work to address hate and bigotry in our community. I'm proud that this year council chose to add equity, diversity, and inclusion as a strategic priority for the city. We are in the midst of a cultural inclusion study that is exploring strategies to promote cultural inclusion in our city programs and services, and especially viewed through that lens of equity. And we're also studying the creation of a Human Relations Commission. So as you heard from the panelists, much of the work that needs to be done goes beyond our specific area of influence. It will require all of us to work together, to learn from each other, and self-reflect on how we all can become better allies in the fight against our common enemy, white supremacy, and the fear, hate, and division that it fosters. So I want to thank you again for joining. This is just a first step, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you to make everyone's voices heard. Your actions of solidarity can make Sunnyvale and the Bay Area a better place to live. Thank you, and from all of City Council, I just want to thank everyone in city staff and all the panelists for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We're going to end with a closing reflection from Department of Public Safety Chaplain Jim Aslan. Jim?
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everyone, for your insightful and valuable perspectives and voices. A good way for me to gauge a forum is how it informs and teaches me. And I've learned some things today. So much of hate is a result of unreasonable and desperate fear of loss or a lack of control. My takeaway from this is to strive to exemplify personally in my private life and my public life what we want to see in this forum. I think the application of it all starts with me. And so to foster a healthy dialogue, I have to refrain from arriving at conclusions or opinions that reflect my own personal echo chamber or my biases. I need to be cautious with groupthink, staying away from labels. I need to never opt out or turn away or fail to engage when I can come to someone else's defense and be part of the solution. All the while listening to other people for who they are, asking questions when I don't understand something, and respecting that we all have far more in common than we do dividing us. Some of us as parents know that for the next generation, more is caught than taught. And being an example is a powerful guide to those looking on. So I aspire not only to do unto others as I would want done unto me, but to also love others in the same way. Those words common and unity make up this community. And I'm very thankful to be in community with you all. Thanks again to the city of Sunnyvale and all who've co-labored in putting this forum together, for all you have attended today. I have no doubt that we collectively can become a solution to this problem. Perhaps in the future, we'll be able to meet in person and even shake hands again. Stay inspired, stay healthy, and have a purposeful week, everyone. God bless, and bye for now.
Thank you for that thoughtful reflection. And thank you to all of our guests, all who joined tonight, and especially those who shared their experiences and perspectives. I also want to acknowledge City Clerk David Carnahan, who managed the behind the scenes logistics. Thank you, David. And we invite you to visit sunnyvale.ca.gov/unity to subscribe to our email list to stay informed and engaged on equity and inclusion issues. That concludes our evening tonight, and good night, and thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.